Arabian hypocrisy and the Islamist movement. Muhammad Kamal. An anonymous person who identified himself as a Kuwaiti Bidun, status Kuwaiti, sent me photographs of his ambassador in the UK, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps to send to his court, Khalid al-Waysan. The photographs, which were taken according to the sender in a charity dinner, showed al-Waysan enjoying a glass of wine, the same wine which is prohibited in his own country, Kuwait. These photographs have not surprised me at all, as I already saw Mr. al-Waysan drinking alcohol before. Recently, a European diplomat told me that he was a bit shocked to see the same ambassador drinking in a welcoming Christmas party hosted by the Bosnian ambassador. My friend's comment was, how can Muslim ambassadors get so drunk in public? I said to my European friend that nominal Islam alone is not enough to lead to Islamic ethics, and that many non-Muslim people are closer to the Islamic ethical system than many Muslims. If a country like Venezuela, for example, was a member of the Security Council when the issue of a Palestinian state was debated, it would have supported the establishment of this state, unlike the Bosnian Muslim state that refused to recognize Palestine, and seems to have forgotten the Islamic and Arabic support during the conflict with the Serbs. Unlike Kuwait and her sisters conspiring against the new Iraq, a country like Japan would support Iraq if it was among its neighboring regions. Arabian diplomats of the Gulf are well known for their violation of their own ethical laws, and I am very familiar with this fact due to my work as a journalist. I still remember the day I smelled alcohol on the breath of a Qatari ambassador in an Islamic prayer, and the story of a Kuwaiti ambassador who went drunk to the presidential palace in the host country. I have even seen a Saudi diplomat drinking alcohol in a non-Arab embassy in front of his colleague who works as a religious attaché in charge of facilitating Islamic pilgrimage and promoting Wahhabism abroad. Al-Bilad, a daily newspaper owned by the Muslim Brotherhood in Algeria, suspended my weekly column 10 years ago because of an article I wrote about sex scandals of Ibrahim al-Sahlawi, the current Director of Arab Affairs Department in the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the brother of Mahmoud al-Sahlawi, a former diplomat and an official of Al Jazeera TV channel. My objective in this article is not to expose Arabian diplomats' love of wine and women. I've just used these examples to discuss a more important topic, the deep hypocrisy wearing the cloak of Islam which exists in the Gulf countries, hypocrisy which the Islamists help to spread in the Islamic world by their attempts to promote an Arabian model of Sharia. In fact, Arabian hypocrisy will be as harmful as a hidden virus which you get from a second-hand computer. I must at first make it clear that while I give myself an absolute freedom to autopsy and to criticize the Islamist movements, I do not criticize Islam, the divine religion. Contrariwise, what I am trying to do is to defend this religion from the danger of Islamist hypocrisy, as I defended previously against radical secularism. Hypocrisy will kill the spirit of Islam and keep only the shape. It will sometimes push people towards apostasy. Nothing is more threatening to Islam than to superficialize it, to make from it a clerical corpse, and to allow the clergyman to become infallible and to be above any kind of critic. A hostile country like Israel would not find a better friend than a cleric like Yusuf al-Qaradawi, nor of a better media than a TV channel like Al Jazeera, taming Arab public opinion in the name of Islam or the name of freedom for the benefit of Qatar, governed by the US, governed by Israel. I must also make it clear that any attack on the Islamists today or in the future does not mean that I call for the confiscation of people's right to choose or for the manipulation of their choice. As explained in a previous article entitled How Did I Predict Ben Ali's Fall, I fiercely defended the Islamic identity of Tunisia a few months before the Tunisian Revolution in the presence of officials from that country. This was at the same time when others were toadying the Tunisian government in order to obtain a summer vacation in the warm beaches of Tunisia. I argued with Generals Khalid Nazar, Al-Arbi Bilkhair, Mohammed Touati, and many of the military officers who plotted 1992 coup in Algeria about the illegality of their coup. I must also pay the necessary respect for all peoples of the Gulf, whom I do not mean when I speak about corrupt elites in the Gulf and nearly collapsing governments there. I did the same during the football crisis between Algeria and Egypt in my article The Benefits of the Algerian-Egyptian War, where I clearly called for the crisis to end up unveiling corruption of the Egyptian government and its elite, as well as my government and its elite. I was very keen to ensure that my critics do not include ordinary misled people who were used as a fuel for the fire of anger which would have burned them to pave the way to power inheritance from Mubarak to his son. And let's stick to the subject related to today's escalating Islamic and Islamist road. Islam appeared as something strange in the old Arabian society to spread monotheism together with the values of freedom, justice, and equality. That's why the first people who embraced Islam were poor people, slaves, and medium capitalists with good intentions. It was only when this religion became strong that rich men joined it after decades of opposition and resistance, as it threatened their influence by making slaves and masters equal. When these values disappear from the Islamic understanding of Islam, minor issues like growing a beard become fundamental principles, while a principal Islamic rule like the ban of military alliances with imperialist Zionist powers in order to bring colonialism back become disputable matters pleaded for by Islamic clerics who behave like the Middle Ages popes and rabbis. Such a situation makes from Islam an anesthetic political tool. Monotheism, in fact, teaches how to stop worshipping people and to turn to worship the God of the people. This is not likely to happen unless freedom is established. Freedom is so important in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to the extent that according to these religions, God gave devil a chance to oppose him and to spread his message among the human people. When Islam becomes just a social structure which the guards of the temples attempts to save, leaving the social evils infiltrate the body of the society, this society collapses, even if it appears in full health. When the fixed punishments, hudud, mentioned in the Quran or invented by people are used against the weak and never the strong, and when they stop to be tools of justice and become tools of injustice, when this happens, people start to wash their hands of Islam by apostasy or by hypocrisy. Thus, those who pretend that they are the protectors of Sharia become its first enemies. as people do not make a difference between clandestines and authentic Islam. Arabian states of the Gulf are the best example. Clerics gradually turned the religion to a pliant instrument of governance exploited by the ruler. Since the famous agreement between Muhammad bin Saud and Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab existed, an agreement which helped the state to control people's destinies with the sword of politics and the sword of religion. Such an alliance grew 2 centuries later, three Arab tribes, Atiba, Bufair, and Al-Adban, in a militia called Ikhwan Man Ta'Allah, the Brotherhood of God Obedient. The soldiers of these militia fought to grant the throne to King Abdul Aziz al Saud, as they thought he was a divinely guided caliph. They turned against him when they knew his real intentions, but were bombed by British aircraft which defeated them and destroyed their dream to topple the regime of al Saud, which they have to settle. One day, history will provide, far from the influence of the petrodollars, more details about the massacres committed by King Abdulaziz and his militia to control the Emirates of Hail, Hijaz, and the Eastern Zone. Massacres like the massacre of Al-Nisiyah, Al-Wahid, and Al-Juthamiyah in 1921, or like the massacre of Al-Ta'if in 1924, or Najran in 1934. Najran's massacre was led by Saud bin Abdul Aziz, who was later crowned king. This is in addition, of course, to the carnage left behind by the Saudi army and the British aircraft in 1929 in Asbala battle, where most of the soldiers of the group called Brotherhood of God Obedient were killed. The group leaders, Faisal al-Duwaish and Sultan bin Majid, died in suspicious circumstances in a Saudi prison. And so did King Abdulaziz with the third commander, Raydan bin Hathlin, whom he reconciled with and then betrayed after the defeat of Atiba and Mutir. Gradually, the Brotherhood of God Obedient was replaced by two alternatives. The first was the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, Al-Hay'a, founded by King Abdulaziz in 1940 after nearly 10 years of his victory over his radical Wahhabi. And the second was the Council of Senior Scholars, which was founded in 1971 in order to institutionalize the leadership of the Wahhabi movement that confronted Pan-Arabism led by Nasser and was supposed to alternate Al-Azhar of Egypt after a long competition. While the ability of the Council of Senior Scholars to correct the ruler's deviations depends on the strength or weakness of its members and the extent of their popularity, the Commission for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, Al-Hay'a, was already weak from the beginning. And unlike the Brotherhood of God Obedient, it is always used against the poor. The old Brotherhood had a strong influence which allowed them, in some occasions, to force King Abdulaziz himself to obey Sharia law. But today's Al-Hay'a cannot and does not want to work outside the framework of the morality police which was created by the ruler. It's not able, for example, to control the pillage of public funds, something that lies at the heart of their competence. From time to time, cries of discontent raised to denounce the double standard policy of the Hay'a, which is committed for the fight of sexual deviations among ordinary citizens only. Neither she nor the police can arrest a Saudi prince suspect of obscenity or indecent assault, for example. The opposite is true. It's very often to see some of Al Saud princes challenging the Hay'a, as did Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, who let the French channel MCs filming his secretaries in indecent dress outside his offices at Al-Mamlaka Tower in Riyadh, a skyscraper which the religious police cannot access without authorization. This privacy rule is completely absent in the dozens of cases which the Hay'a set up annually against ordinary people attacked in their shops assaulted in their houses, and driven to police stations in the famous GMC 4X4 cars of the religious police. Indeed, the fact that Al Saud family is unpunishable means that they are not even accountable to the Sharia law system of punishment. Since the emergence of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932 and even before, when King Abdulaziz was called the Sultan of Najd and Hijaz, no Saudi prince was punished according to the Sharia law, whatever his crime was. It's not the case of the descendants of King Abdulaziz only, it's the case of his 22 brothers and sisters and their children also. Only 3 princes can be excluded from these rules, but no more. Prince Faisal bin Saad, the murderer of King Faisal. Princess Msha'al bint Fahd, who was executed by her grandfather Muhammad bin Abdulaziz, aka Muhammad Abu Sharrain, or Muhammad the Two Abel's father, after being accused of adultery. And Prince Fahd bin Naif, the grandson of King Saud bin Abdulaziz, who killed a teenager named Munzir al-Qadi. Prince Fahd was sentenced to death, but his royal family kept pushing for his release until the family of his victim pardoned him, in what Saudis themselves describe as a silly comedy. It was necessary at the time to absorb the street's anger of injustice, a Saudi observer told me. A saying attributed to Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz, the current defense minister responsible for discipline within the royal family, confirms that the children of Al Saud cannot be punished by Sharia law. This saying seems to be true. If justice was really established in Saudi Arabia, then the first to face the punishment of sowing corruption and chaos on earth will be Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, the owner of Rotana TV channels, which continues spreading immorality and prostitution among the Saudis. This punishment is only used against poor Bengali sellers marketing sex tapes or Captagon narcotic pills. I asked recently an Islamist Saudi hacker who penetrates people's computers and steals important files from them if his hand has to be amputated like the thieves, and I'm still waiting for him to answer back. It's sad to see someone losing his hand for a mobile theft while others loot the public money and stay free. One of the most ridiculous examples is the case of a judge from Medina who took 600 million riyals, about $225 million, when he was chairing a deal committee. The judge was acquitted after he declared that he was under the influence of magic and jinns, ghosts, when he stole the money. There are hundreds of examples of the manipulation of the legal punishment system, a system which was implemented to execute Indonesian and Bengali housemaids, but not the 2 famous British nurses who murdered their colleague in 1997 and were released by the Saudi government under the pressure of the British government. In the absence of a written penal code and the lack of judicial independence and accountability, funny sentences which have nothing to do with the Islamic law can be issued at the discretion of the judge. Corporal punishments can reach thousands of lashes, something which never happened during the time of Prophet Muhammad or any of his caliphs. Such an arbitrary and non-Islamic system can lead to 5 different judgments in one single case. 1. Acquittal. 2. Imposing a fine. 3. Sentencing to lashes. 4. Sentencing to prison. 5. Sentencing to death. Saudi Arabia is not the only example of the lack of justice in the Gulf. In the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Isa bin Zayed Al Nahyan was exempt from punishment after torturing an Afghani farmer, claiming that he was under the influence of the drug. And in Kuwait, the death penalty of Sheikh Talal bin Nasser Al Sabah was suspended, despite his numerous scandals and crimes. Traffic of drugs and grievous bodily harm crimes like the castration of Egyptian singer Ahmed Adawiyah. In Qatar, death sentences issued against several sheikhs from the family of Al Thani, like Muhammad bin Khalifa bin Saud Al Thani, who killed their cousin Ghanem bin Jassim bin Fahd, were suspended. The late Ghanem was the brother-in-law of Fawaz al-Atiyah, the former Qatari diplomat currently detained without trial for 2 years by order of Hamad bin Jassim al-Thani, the Prime Minister. Al-Atiyah was jailed for writing a book about the untold history of the ruling family. He accused one of the grandparents of the current prince to steal the wealth of his orphaned nephew. Sometimes the crimes of the sheikhs are attributed to junior police officers, like in the case of Muhammad Ghazai al-Amtiri from Kuwait. Muhammad Ghazai died under the whip of a young al-Sabah, and the father of the killer was a senior official in the Ministry of Interior who attributed the murder to some of his loyal officers. Today, the Saudi religious movement is becoming a false witness who would not dream to have 10% of the influence which the Wahhabi movement enjoyed in the days of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, Faisal al-Duwaish, or even King Faisal al-Saud. This is why King Abdullah, the current king of Saudi Arabia, dismissed Sheikh Saleh al-Hidan from the Supreme Council of Justice and treated him coldly, as shown by the Saudi television, because of the Sheikh's criticism towards the king's so-called reforms. There are rumors circulating today that Khalid al-Tuwaijiri, President of the Royal Court and Private Secretary of the King, is planning to strip Al-Hidan of the last official position he holds as a member of the Council of Senior Scholars. Khalid is the son of Abdul Aziz al-Tuwaijiri, who helped King Abdullah to take the power by making the National Guard's tribal militias a parallel army. Like his father, Khalid is a sworn enemy of Wahhabism. Both are regarded by the Wahhabi leading figures as enemies of Islam. There is a cold war happening today between the Tuwaijiri and some of the leaders of Islamist movement. This war is encouraged by the Minister of Interior and the Crown Prince Naif bin Abdul Aziz, together with his son Muhammad. Both Muhammad and Naif succeeded to gain the support and loyalty of most of the Islamists except those affiliated with Al-Qaeda. This is why the Saudi Islamists mock at-Tuwaijiri by calling him the divinely guided caliph to respond to his public relations media campaign. This is the formal and nominal Islam of the Gulf, with a bright facade and a golden cross, hiding hypocrisy. An Islam prohibiting music in Ramadan and allowing alcohol, punishing harassers and turning a blind eye to prostitution. Having indicated the prohibition of music and image in the Gulf, I want to mention the case of the Syrian Hollywood director Mustafa al-Aqad and his famous film about Islam called The Message. When al-Aqad went to Saudi Arabia to ask for financial support, not only Saudis refused to help him, claiming that image is forbidden, but they also contacted other Muslim governments to ensure that they will not provide him with any help. Only the Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi resisted this pressure and helped Mustafa to achieve his goal. Gaddafi was declared a believer by his murderers, influenced by the Arabian school of Islam. Thus, scholars of the Gulf ban music for ordinary Muslims, but they cannot silence Muhammad Abdu, the most popular Saudi singer, because he is the prince's friend. They cannot either force the state to abandon Al-Junadriya annual festival as it is organized by the National Guard, a tribal army which is above any kind of law. The same scholars forbid the celebration of any festivity except Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr. but they are not able to express an explicit opinion on the National Day of Saudi Arabia. Questioning the legitimacy of celebrating the National Day could lead to questioning the legitimacy of the Saudi state itself. In the absence of an integral and solid Pojedo society able to address the problems of the times and keen on justice and freedom, and not only the beard and the burqa, in the absence of these alternatives, we will have to wait decades for the clergy to accept some modern values which they rejected in the past. A good example is television, which they were banning for decades and then suddenly adopted. And until then, our nation must remain in the cave of darkness and ignorance, waiting for the slowly modernizing Islamist movement to wake up. It's a fact that Islamic fatwa, religious statement, in the Arabian Peninsula has become a sort of political manifesto used by the ruler to extend his powers and to liquidate his opponents, taking advantage of the naivety and ignorance of some Muslim scholars and the complicity and ambition of others. This is why the Iraqi president Saddam Hussein was glorified by the Arabian political and religious spheres when he was fighting Khomeini of Iran. When he occupied Kuwait, he suddenly became unbelievable, according to the Saudi Mufti Abdulaziz bin Baz, as long as he did not repudiate the principles of the Ba'ath. Despite the fact that Saddam did never leave the Ba'ath, he was unexpectedly turned into a martyr by the Wahhabis after his execution by the Shia. The Libyan Gaddafi was also described as a tyrant who must be killed by the same scholars who used to travel to Libya to ask him for support. Scholars like Yusuf Qaradawi, the same who urged the Taliban not to tear down the Buddhist statues in Afghanistan, but did nothing to stop the US administration from targeting civilian Muslims in Iraq and in Afghanistan from the 2 US military bases surrounding his house in Doha. This is the hypocritical double standards Islamism, treating NATO forces as liberators in Libya and as enemies in Afghanistan. And I must make it clear here that I had witnessed verbal argument with Omar Julban, the last pro-Gaddafi ambassador in the UK, just 2 days before the start of the Libyan events, after he mocked the idea of human rights and freedom in Libya. But the military intervention of the NATO confirmed my conviction that dictatorship must not be replaced by colonialism. Today, I cannot see what happened in Libya as a revolution. Such politicization of the fatwa is the reason why the Arabian Islamic scholars did never excommunicate the Shia of Iran during the Shah time and suddenly changed their mind after Khomeini's revolution. I have no doubt that if the current regime of Iran is replaced by a pro-American regime, the number of the Arabian fatwas excommunicating the Shia will significantly fall. The same could happen with the Sufi Turkey. The Arabian media and the religious spheres are currently courting and promoting the Turkish political leadership in order to draw Istanbul into a war with Tehran for the benefit of the US and Israel. This war will cost blood of the Turkish, the Iranian, and possibly the Iraqi, Syrian, Jordanian, and Moroccan, while the Arabians of the Gulf benefit from the increase of the price of oil like they did during the war between Iran and Iraq in the 1980s. When the new war is over, and if the rulers of the Gulf feel any kind of Turkish threat, they will push their scholars to excommunicate the Sufi Turks. Turkish leader will be seen by the Saudi scholars as idolaters, stray, polytheists, and heretics like Saddam, Gaddafi, and Khomeini in the past. In fact, the same so-called Islamic schools which demonized Nasser for asking Soviets to help him build Aswan's dam and to equip the Egyptian armed forces in the 60s let the American forces occupy the land of the two holy mosques in the beginning of the 90s and called for a US proxy jihad against the Soviets in Afghanistan in the 70s. This is the same school which convinced Muslims that liberating Palestine starts from Afghanistan and not from Egypt, country of Zawahiri, or Saudi Arabia, country of Bin Laden, or Jordan, country of Abdullah Azzam, who made up plenty of stories about miracles of the Mujahideen, like blowing Russian planes up by throwing sand on them. It's the same school which excommunicated Gaddafi, Saddam, and Khomeini to Islamically justify alliances with the West against them, and failed to do the same with Bourguiba and Ben Ali, who expressed obvious radical views against Islam because they were allies to the Gulf countries. Some of the scholars who attacked Saudi Arabia for hosting US forces in its soil 20 years ago supported the NATO attacks in Libya recently and asked for the same to happen in Syria. Unfortunately, the rulers of the Gulf, and in particular the ruler of Qatar, regard the world politics as a big PlayStation or a massive game which they play to overthrow undesirable regimes, not for the benefit of their peoples or the benefit of Islam, but to satisfy a sick ambition of dominance, aiming to represent the US interests in the Middle East, like if this region was a McDonald's local restaurant, a Ford Motors agency, or a clinic branch for silicone surgery. The secret audio tape leaked recently, in which the ruler of Qatar and his prime minister were conspiring with the late Gaddafi against the Saudi regime, show how childish and irresponsible they are. They are like an infant who burns his neighbor's house to enjoy some fireworks. That's why I was not surprised to hear the question of Khalid al-Mansouri, the ambassador of Qatar in London, to the former Jordanian Crown Prince Hassan bin Talal about his opinion on Qatar's hosting of the World Cup. Al-Hassan replied sarcastically, "I thought you were going to host the Hajj." Such a frightening way of thinking, lacking any sense of responsibility, was behind a headline published in the Saudi Al-Sharq Al-Awsat describing the beginning of trouble in Damascus and Aleppo as an athlete's warming up. Like if what's happening in Syria is a marathon and not a blood-soaked conflict. Is it Islamic to burn your brother's house because he threatens your interests and the interests of the United States? Is it Islamic to deposit your money in usually Western banks and to pretend that you are an Islamic state? Is it Islamic to widely open your country to Westerners and to impose a difficult to obtain visa on Muslims worldwide? Is it Islamic to hold the Syrian and the Libyan regimes accountable for their mistakes and to ignore injustice against the Shia in Bahrain and Eastern Saudi Arabia as they are not Sunni? I told Buthayna Sha'ban, the spokeswoman of the Syrian regime, years ago that it is not decent to denounce sectarianism in Iraq and to ignore it in her own country. But having loudly spoken against the Alawite minority unbalanced power in Syria, I find today's sectarian cause to support Sunni brothers against the unbeliever Shia unpalatable. When a pro-Saudi Syrian scholar like Adnan al-Ar'ur calls for the slaughter of the Alawite in TV channels financed by the Kuwaiti MP Walid al-Tabtabai and the Saudi Prince Khalid bin Talal, and when he asks the people of Aleppo to join the revolution even if 100,000 of them are killed without having the courage to send one of his sons there, he proves that he is not less criminal than Rami Makhlouf or Maher al-Assad, whom he accuses of corruption and brutality. When Arabians ignore corruption and dictatorship in their own countries and join the wave of opposition against Assad's regime, and when they speak about human rights in Syria instead of speaking about thousands jailed without charge in the prisons of Al-Hayr, Alisha, Dhahban, Al-Ruwais, Al-Qatif, Abha, Al-Dammam, Al-Juf, they just show how repulsive, blind, and un-Islamic is sectarianism. It's not strange, by the way, that most of the TV channels and websites that fuel the flames of sectarianism are funded by Arabian businessmen and politicians, Shia and Sunni. How can Arabian Muslims support their Sunni sisters in Syria and ignore recent reports from the Saudi Association for Civil and Political Rights about jailed women being assaulted and threatened with rape by prison guards and secret police officers? What can Muslim clerics say about Dahban's prison officer who sexually harassed Najla al-Rumi and Haifa al-Ahmadi? The officer told the two political activists, "You are at my disposal and I can do what I want to you. No one will know it." How come regime scholars insist on full segregation in the streets and authorize male investigators to lock themselves up with women imprisoned for their political activities such as Hayla al-Qasir, Najla al-Rumi, Haifa al-Ahmadi, حس الزهراني, نجوى السعيدي, حنان الكثيري, وفاء اليحيى, Arwa Baghdadi, and others? Will Saudi clerics denounce breaking the hand of Azza Zahrani several weeks ago by the police when she demonstrated outside the higher prison urging the Saudi government to try her son or to release him? Her son Faris al-Shwein al-Zahrani, who despite being accused of terrorism has not been tried so far since his arrest 5 years ago. Faris is regularly tortured and badly treated, not necessarily for his alleged terrorist activities, but apparently for his famous declaration, "The Saudi nationality is under my feet." This is strongly possible, as the Gulf prisons are full of innocent people arrested for political reasons and charged with terrorism. What is the Islamist position towards the sentencing of Khalid al-Rashid for 15 years after he called for demonstration to expel the Danish ambassador over the Prophet's cartoons issue? 15 years, which includes 5 years for public order offense and 10 years for contempt of court, as he objected the 5 years sentence. What is their position towards the sentencing of Saud al-Hashimi for 30 years after he called for reform? And what is their position towards the imprisonment of thousands of jihadis, callers for constitutional monarchy, Sahwa militants, and reformists without charge? Does Islam unleash injustice in the name of state security? Truly, narcissistic clerics do whatever they want. They spend money wastefully in honeymoons, as did the 85-year scholar Yusuf al-Qaradawi. They bless tyrants, as did the Imam of Mecca, Abdul Rahman al-Sudais, with the former Pakistani dictator Parvez Musharraf. They ban resistance in Iraq, as did Abdul Muhsin al-Abikan, the religious advisor of the Saudi king. They stand against Hezbollah because it's a Shia organization, as did Abdullah ibn Jibril. And they accuse the families of innocent prisoners to be callers for disorder, as did Tawfiq al-Saya. These scholars lack the integrity and the courage of their historical spiritual leaders. Despite our opinions on people like Ibn Hanbal, Ibn Taymiyyah, and Al-Izz ibn Abd salam, we must respect their commitment to their ideas, which cost them prison and exile. Islamists who not only fail to fight discrimination, but even justify racial divisions that divide people in the Gulf into nobles, Gabili, and untouchables, Khadiri and Slubi, such Islamists are not different from barbaric ancient people who used to infanticide females or castrate males. The chauvinist Islamist who distinguishes himself from poor Yemenis and Iraqis justifies injustice against stateless Kuwaitis and Emiratis and accepts outright social inequality between Saudi districts. Such an Islamist needs to revise his understanding of Islam. Thus, the Gulf Islamism failed even to relieve the symptoms of racism which exists not only between the Arabian and the non-Arabian Muslims, but also between the citizens of the 6 members of the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, who deal with each other with suspicion, fear, superiorism, and discrimination. Such a deep discrimination exists even between the co-citizens. Like in Saudi Arabia, where the influence of the people of Al Qasim province in the executive and the religious institutions is highly criticized by the rest of the Saudis, or where tribes use very insulting language toward each other. Such a situation is encouraged by the ruler and ignored by the Islamists. There have been recently several legal cases where Arabian couples were forced by the court to divorce due to tribal incompatibility. Those cases are the best proof that Islam is not the real constitution of the Gulf and that the Sharia is actually ridden by tribalism and sectarianism. If slaves like Bilal, Suhaib, and Salman, who were the first to embrace Islam, were still alive and sought to marry a girl from Al Saud, Al Thani, Al Subah, Al Maktoum, or Al Sa'id families, they would be sent to prison or to a mental hospital. Indeed, Islamists did nothing to help the women who appeared in the Saudi NBC channel begging for some donkey meat to feed her children. They did nothing to stop plundering the state treasury with the huge no-work salaries, mukhassasat, offered to thousands of princes and sheikhs who spread this money among their servants, bodyguards, singers, and sex agents. It's unlikely for the worldwide Islamist movement not to be affected with such Arabian disease of hypocrisy, as they draw their financial support and even intellectual inspiration from that stagnant upstream. The most relevant examples can be found in Egypt, where the Islamists are struggling for power and ignoring the strategic external threats which their country faces, and in Tunisia, where an unelected person like Rashid al-Ghannouchi selects his relatives and political valets as ministers. Ghannouchi's daughter Sumaya, married to the current Tunisian foreign minister, was one of several people in charge of projects sponsored by the former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, to support the Muslim community. They were all from the Muslim Brotherhood, and they fanatically excluded other Islamic groups, from Salafi and Sufi to Shia and secular Muslims. History will write that the changes that have occurred in the Gulf states and in other Arab countries which had led to equality, freedom, and social justice were directly or indirectly related to the efforts of nationalist secular movements and not to the Islamist movements, despite the fact that Islam called for those principles long before the European thinkers. The Arab Islamist movements need to intellectually and practically separate themselves from the Gulf states, and this cannot happen without financial and organic independence. Such independence permits more openness, rationality, and harmony with Islamic teachings, far from tribalism and chauvinism. The rulers of Saudi Arabia have a custom to invite thousands of politicians, journalists, and intellectuals to perform the Hajj at the expense of the state. Some of these invitees are drunkards and delinquents who like to enjoy the Saudi luxurious hospitality. A joke tells that when one of these hypocrites was stoning devil outside Mecca, Satan appeared to him and said with a broken voice, full of grief, "You too, Brutus." Muhammad.